Now that we have the amp all unwrapped and we have a separate material that's been applied, physical material, and it's been applied to each grouping that we want to keep together in substance. So meaning that if we have, a piece, for instance, we've got the amp head body here. If I right click on this and say select by material and then say select, all of these pieces with Alt Q just to isolate it, all of these have the same material. So these are going to all show up on one set of texture maps and are going to be placed all together. Now, there are some objects in here that we don't want to bother exporting, things like the cables and these little cables in the back that we've just gone with some procedural textures. We really don't need much more than that. If we had to get really close, maybe we'd want to put dirt on them if we wanted to be rendering them up really, really close. In this case, we may not want to be. There may also be things like some of these small buttons that we may not want to bother, especially if it was only ever going to be seen off in the distance. If it's coming up really close and a nice shot might be looking at it across the top of it, we want to make sure maybe that there's a little dirt on these, a little wear on them. So we're going to texture those in this case. So they've been unwrapped in there. Now I've broken off all of the pieces that are just to be dealt with procedural materials. Now, if we turn that off, oops, so this one, you'll notice even the little wires on the ends of, I guess those are little resistors that I kind of created or whatever, little electronic components. All those, all of the, guiding splines have been thrown in there just so I don't have to worry about it. And so this is everything that needs to be exported now. I'm just going to go Control A, or you can pick everything out of here if you like. We're going to go to File, Export, Export Selected. I'm going to dump it out to one of the exports. I've already done this, so it asked me that question. And of course, smoothing groups turned on just in case. And this is one of the things that's going to come up here is that if you read this, it says using bake animation option. So what's happened is on this item down here, which is the end of the patch cord, it's actually on a path constraint on the end of the patch cord, and it doesn't know what to do with that. So it's just warning you that any animation that's being exported won't be exported with this. Well, that's really not a concern. I'm not really going to worry about that too much. So I'm going to go ahead and export that. We'll now head over to Substance, and we can skip down and say new, and we'll start a new project. So we're going to go with just the PBR metallic, and I'm going to say select, and we're going to go and find our export, and we're going to set it at 2048 in this case, and say import. I'll just say discard. So here's the amp. Yours may come in, and if you press F1, you'll get both. So this is actually showing the UVs of the layer that we've currently got picked. So if we go to texture set here, and again, you may have this set up a little bit differently. I think the layers by default are actually down here. But you can see now we have all of these different pieces put together, and we can check all these and see if the unwrap is working. I'm a little concerned with this one. It looks a little odd. I'm not quite sure. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to have to check this piece and see whether or not there is an issue with the amp cabinet electronics unwrap, and just make sure that that's all working properly. So I can go through these and click on them, and it looks like I've got some overlaps happening. Looks like I've made some mistakes, so I can definitely see that things are overlapping on knobs here. So I definitely have some issues that I need to go back and correct. So that's the first thing you want to be doing, is checking all these and ensuring that indeed they're actually working correctly. This does not look like what I expect it to be. So there's definitely some problems. So we're going to go back to Max now. I'll fix those and then I'll re-export them. So I found the culprit and fixed it. It was just I had other objects that hadn't been unwrapped properly that were in there. And just so you know, you don't have to go about restarting your project. You can simply go to edit and say re-import mesh after you've exported again. And now I've checked and see the cabinet electronics looks correct. And I had others here that I wanted to make sure that were correct as well. And the same thing, they actually had unwraps on them that were covering everything, because it was the little filaments inside of the tubes. And those hadn't actually been unwrapped, or they probably actually had an unwrap, but they filled the UV space. That's why it looks so odd. So the next step will be breaking up our, each shader into some groups and layers that we can start working on it. For instance, I'm just going to hide off all the parts here except for the amp cabinet piece. I'm going to press F2 just to go full screen on this. So we have several elements here that I've packed all together and are all on the same shader. Now, the problem with this is if I start trying to, for instance, paint on this, plate on the side, which would be, have some information about the amp, name of the amp or whatever, um, I'm going to end up painting right over on the side. And you can see what happens. I'm just going to change the color here to blue or something. And as we paint, I end up painting right over. So I'm going to have a really hard time painting on each individual piece without ending up with it going all over the place. So what we need to do is break that down with some masking. And so here's an easy way to deal with that. We're going to use the grouping here, and we're going to create a group. Now, this is a little bit different than Photoshop. Generally, when you mask, in Photoshop, you're masking layers. You can't mask a group and everything inside it, but here we can. I'm going to move this base layer up into this group so it's part of it. And I'm just going to name this cabinet so I know what it is. And it's going to be the outside of the cabinet anyways, inside the amp cabinet, shader. And now I want to make sure that I mask out everything so I'm not painting on anything except for the actual outside of it. And we can do that by using this mask. And if you notice, I'm on the group and I'm going to choose add black mask. That is going to make everything become transparent effectively so that there's no, you can't see any of that drawing that we just did. Now we can then go down to the fifth button down. It set me there already, and it is polygon fill. Now there's 4 options in polygon fill. We can fill by triangles, so it's showing us these all the triangles in the mesh, by polygon, by element, so for the full element, or actually by the unwrap itself. So we can work with this to do it as well. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to go by element. The mask is all black. I'm going to choose white, and I'm going to choose on the cabinet here, and you'll now see that I'm no longer, it's masked out the lines that were drawing on the pieces I didn't want. So another thing I do then is make sure I go around and scribble on everything just to see where I can end up drawing and can't. And you'll notice I can draw on the corner pieces. It has picked those up. I think it's because they are so close to the mesh or to the vertices. For some reason, it thinks it's the same element, but it isn't the same element. So we're going to have to mask that back out again. So back up to our mask. You can see the mask is highlighted in blue, and that means it's the active thing. We're going to be drawing on the mask. But now we're not going to be able to do that by element anymore. We're going to want to do that by the actual UVs. So I'm going to go back to a side-by-side view here with F1. And then we can go about masking out these pieces. So you can see that I've drawn on them here. And I'm going to take it back into blacks because I want to make these pieces transparent now. And just pick on all of these pieces and make sure they no longer allow me to draw on them, and just find them all in the unwrap. And let's just confirm that indeed now when I go and paint, I can't paint on things. Looks like I missed one there. And it's a good way to do it because you'll actually find them. There it is there. It's the same thing back up to the mask, and I'm just going to click on the on those element pieces and make sure that they're unpaintable. So once I've got that, I can then do that on other pieces. Let's say, for instance, the grill here. Well, the grill is going to be very difficult to do if you wanted to do it by element because it's many tiny little elements. It was made with the array, and it's going to be difficult because it's all these separate little pieces. So we're pretty much going to have to do it in the material, like in the unwrap, sorry. But that's going to be pretty easy. So we can add that. I'm just going to create a new grouping down here. So we're going to create a new group, and I'm going to make sure that is outside that. And we're going to call this one grill. And I'm going to add a mask on everything again. So I'm going to mask out everything so I can't paint on anything. And then I'm going to go ahead and mask in. And all I got to do is you can actually drag on pieces. And in doing so, I just allowed us to be able to mask that back in again. So let's take a look at that. Oh, by the way, these don't update very quickly, I find. You have to sort of click off and click back. And now you can see in the corner, you can see where I've masked in this. So I've masked out everything else but this. So here's something else I do is I often start with a base color layer in these to start getting an idea of colors as I'm going. And then I can work over top of that. But it's a good way to sort of good habit to get into, just playing with your color palette and getting your color palette to work. So in Photoshop, you tend to just make a layer and fill it. In Substance, we make a fill layer, and that fill layer is inside this grill. And we can then go ahead and fill this with a color. And so there's a couple of ways to do it. You can just go ahead and pick the color, obviously, and pick some color. You can see my grill is turned, bright red here in this case. Now, what might want to do is start pulling off of very specific elements. So here is my amplifier, actually, PV Delta Blues, and an image of it. And what we can do is we can use this color picker and pick right off these. Now I'm going to have to move this over to my other monitor because it will, I need them both on top at the same time. But you'll see now with a color picker, I can go ahead and I can color pick right on it. And so there I've set it to a brown and filled it all with brown now. And I have a brown starting point, or I could pick one of the other lighter colors. I can do that with this, the cabinet as well. I'm just going to go stick a layer in there, this fill layer, and I'm going to go in and pick one of the colors for it. So it's the right color, sort of a base starting point, and I have an understanding of what my color palettes are going to be. And now what I want to do is go around and do that to all of the other pieces before I start painting. Now I tend to go and do it all at once. I'll go and break down the different elements and make sure that each one of them, I can go ahead and paint on. I don't forget what I'm doing. Now, in some cases here, it's not going to matter as much. If we take a look at all the knobs, well, when I'm painting on one knob, I'm not going to be painting accidentally on the others, because they're all separated, so it doesn't matter so much. That can, be true as well for just the amp cabinet. For instance, the corner pieces, the nameplate here, this part of the handle, the sort of the box part of the handle, those are all separate elements and they're all separated by some space. So I can paint on one without accidentally painting on another. So I could make just a layer or a grouping of all those pieces together. The handle and the little rivets could all go on another one because again they're all separated, so break it up as you feel you need to break it up, and don't necessarily have complete overkill, on, because you'll forget which layer you're painting in and start painting the wrong one or something. That's how you get started. That's how I like to break it down anyways, to get my footing.